This is a shim, a metal shim. I have 5 of them to go in the Kingpins. I really need probably 10 or 12. This cup is probably about as thick as 2 or 3 of these shims. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut a shim out of this plastic cup, and I can probably use another shim on either side of it when I put it in out there. That's going to save me from having to try and track these shims down. The other thing I'm doing is that these Kingpins are, the new Kingpins are a hair longer than the old Kingpins. And that isn't a problem, except that there's a channel in here where the grease, when you put the grease in through the grease fitting, the grease runs down into that lower bearing. The channel on these longer ones goes almost to the end. On the old one, the channel goes to right about here. So what I've done is, rather than having to go out and try to buy new pins, I've taken a little H.A.M.B weld, mixed it up, and filled the track right there. Once that dries, I should be able to sand that nice and round again so that it slips down in there easily, but it should fill up the grease track. Alright, I'm going to talk a little bit about how Kingpins and bushings set up. Basically, this is your front axle. Here's your spindle. Your spindle sits right here. This is a bushing that goes down here below this. And up here, in order to keep this from having any up and down play, you see that little bit of play that you have there? We're going to put some shims in here. I'm not going to do that part yet. I'm just showing you how they go. Once everything's all in place and lined up, these are your Kingpins, and they go in so that this notch is lined up with this hole. There's also a groove right here. This is the grease track that I was telling you about before, so that when you squirt grease in here, it goes up and sort of greases that bearing, theoretically. That's the way it's supposed to work. So the Kingpin goes right in here. And by the way, the bushings has been replaced in these spindles on either side. I've got one over here I can show you. That's the part that's made to wear out. This steel part here doesn't wear out. In fact, this thing is kind of rust together, so you have to heat it to get it out. But these are the new bushings inside of here. These are the parts you replace. These and the pins. Because the old pins also, this is the pins that came out of there, and you can see that a lot of rust and corrosion and wear. So they wouldn't really be as tight as the new ones either. So that's pretty much how it goes. The trick is just to line it up, get the proper number of shims and things in there. And once you get this down in here, you take a bolt like this that has a groove here, and that bolt will go in right here. You probably have to hammer that a little bit to get it in there, and then there's a special nut that goes on the other side that you tighten this up with. Once you get that all in place, and you've got it so that you don't have any play or anything, you're done. You have and that's all a front end on one of these old cars is. It's like a hinge. Basically, that's exactly what it is. It's a hinge, and that's how it works. Oh, I guess there's one more thing I ought to mention. This is the bearing that goes down below, and I'm going to want to, this came without grease in it, so I'm going to want to try to force grease down in here. And I don't know of a better way to do that than with my bare hands. One of the things my dad taught me, he used to work in a shop, and he would coat his hands with clean motor oil before he started, because the clean motor oil would get down in the cracks of his skin, and that way the dirty dirt wouldn't. Probably what I'll do is just shoot some WD-40 on my hands, and then just take that grease in my fingers and just work it over in here. The other type of bearing that you do this sort of thing is a wheel bearing, and on those you put the grease in the palm of your hand and you work the bearing. Okay, one more thing I failed to mention that I probably should before I start putting this all back together is when I put these pins in, there's this little felt piece that's going to go on top, and it's going to go on with this little, it's kind of like a washer with a little ridge around it. That's going to be all the way up here at the top, and the reason for that is that for the same reason, there's going to be a grease fitting in the spindle here. When you squirt the grease in, it's going to squish up and down, and this felt piece is going to be sitting right there, which is supposed to keep the grease from all squirting out of the top, sort of force it to go down toward where the action is. So didn't want to leave that part out. That's important. I'm going to put it all together and then I'll show it to you. Okay, there you go. That's in there nice and tight. See how that pulled up? Nice and flush there. And this is good and sturdy. There's no play in it. There's no wobble. That's perfect. Now I'm going to do the other side. Okay, here's the last thing. I put these grease fittings in here and filled it all full of grease, and a nice little layer of grease kind of came right on either side so that this thing is sort of floating in some grease. And I'll show you the inside of these bearings, the way they're made. There's a groove inside of there. You can probably see that groove, and when the grease comes in through the grease fitting, that groove sort of spreads the grease all around inside of there so that greases that up on that shaft good. Alrighty.